This is Fintech Takes, the podcast keeping you in the loop on all the latest fintech trends, news, and ideas. I'm Alex Johnson, creator of the Fintech Takes newsletter, your host and self-confessed fintech nerd. Let's go.
Shamir, let's go back to the Wayback Machine here. And the year is early 2013. I'm guessing this started for you about the same time. We had just gotten the news from our investors at Perk Street that, hey, it's been a great 5 years. Time to go sell the business. And, I still remember hearing for the first time you guys were in market at the same time. And, we had the upside of we appealed to kind of middle America, but you guys were Silicon Valley rock stars, kind of putting fintech on the map. Walk us through what was going through your mind? What was the process when you and Josh were coming to this realization? It's hey, we need to go find an exit, and you were far from done, with what you're seeking to accomplish. But what was that process like?
Kicking and screaming, if I was to use two words, right? So the way that ended up happening was we finally got Simple launched in July of 2012, only about 2.5 years behind schedule, right? And so we'd raised a lot of money, probably about 13 million at that point when we launched. And we had a pretty big team. We had 30-ish people, I think, when we launched. And we had a burst of growth, and then we figured out that it's just getting people to sign up doesn't help if they don't actually use the product. And then we started working on solving the kind of activation problem, which and at this point we were on Bancorp, and anytime we tried to onboard more than 4,000 or 5,000 customers in a month, their system just broke. We'd have people stuck in a queue for we'd get more than 1,000 people stuck in a queue where they hadn't heard a response for a week, and I'm that at some point it starts becoming unacceptable, right? So we were sort of throttled in our growth by Bancorp, and at the same time we had a huge activation problem where everybody would put $100, spend it, and never do another transaction after the second or third one, right? So we started working on that, and I will say that at the time it felt like the sky is falling down, and we got to solve this problem. Our activation on our internal metric bottomed out at around 15% in September of 12. By January of 13, it was up to 23-25%, and it hit 33% at max. And this is an internal metric. It was not the industry standard one transaction per customer in last 30 days.
Real metrics, metrics. If you were trying to build a business, what you want to put into the Excel model around a real customer, not vanity metrics of they looked at the login to the app.
We basically in a 6-month period went from possibly the worst activation level to probably the best in the industry if you looked across it, right? Our active customers, that percentage of 30% of the cohort that was active, were doing more than 30 transactions a month on average, right? So we solved the problem fundamentally by January of 13, but we were almost out of money. And Facebook had gone public in 2012, and then their stock price had tanked, and that led to a VC chill. So we kicked off a fundraise process in January of 13 to raise 15 million for a Series B, then got a term sheet in February in 3 weeks' time for 25 million. Way more than we wanted from Warburg Pincus. And then 2 weeks of due diligence later, they pulled the term sheet. And we were like, why? And they were like, yeah, we just decided not to do the deal. And we're like, no, did you find something in due diligence? I was like, no, just decided not to do the deal. We're like, what the? And that's when that's one of my big learnings was that a PE firm, a term sheet is a little bit more valuable than toilet paper. Right. A VC firm which writes a term sheet expects to close on 98% of the term sheets it writes. A PE firm expects to close on maybe 30% of the term sheets they write. Right. The term sheet is their way of getting into the deal. It's not any indication that they will close it. Right. So there we were in sort of early April of 13, with about 8 weeks of runway left, a 60% team, because we had to scale customer service like crazy just to keep up with all the broken stuff on the back end. Business was growing. We had solved the activation problem. Revenue was like profitability at 30% activation was like 6x profitability at 15%. It was massive, right? Everything was beginning to work, but we were out of money. And there was no time to go raise another round. On the flip side, our inside investors were all sort of seed investors who had stretched to write a Series B to us. There was no way they could write a Series C. It was impossible, right? So we had to go to them and be like, hey, we need an inside round. And they were like, look, we can give you a couple of million, but we can't do much more than that. And we had always had inbound interest from kind of lots of people. We just ignored it. We never wanted to sell. They were like, you have to hire a banker and start looking at this inbound interest, because we can't, you have like, how much did we have? We had like more than 30,000 customers at that point, probably 40,000-ish. You can't take the risk that you just run out of money with like all these people's money, right? Yeah. And forget the VC money, right? But at least like customers need so we were like, okay, fine. You give us the bridge loan to tide us over for a few months, and we'll hire a banker. And Josh and I were like, we'll hit the fundraising road again and find another term sheet. And for us, we were like, we will work with the banker just because that's what our investors want. We're going to go work on getting a round together. So that's how it actually started in sort of June, July of 13.
And when you were, sort of progressing through that process, I hear a lot of stories like this where it's almost like stages of grief in terms of like, we're not quite to acceptance yet. Like, where along that journey of, we're going to talk to a banker, but then, we're also going to be looking for more sort of VCs to sort of fund another round. Like, when did that flip and you said, okay, now we have to like sell?
I can go back and find the exact date, but it was around 6 p.m. on, I think, around January 29th of 2014.
That is an incredibly specific date. So what drove that realization? Like what was the switch that kind of flipped at that point? Was it just you couldn't find investors that were willing to do another round?
It was way worse than that. We, at that point, we had, we got a offer from BBVA, and that was how that happened. There were so many things. Then we spent like months and months in like due diligence, where they hired a banking law firm to do the due diligence, and they tried to do it the way that one bank acquires another bank, and that
which is not what you guys were.
No conception of fintech. We'd get on calls with like 30 compliance people and our like 3% team, right? I'm like, what the heck? Right? But we had finally gotten to the point by end of January where the number was pretty much locked in at 117 million. The terms are pretty much locked in, and we were just like a week or two away from signing the final docs and closing the deal, right? We also had a term sheet from one of the best VC firms on the planet for a 25 million round at a decent valuation. And so we could have walked away from the deal and taken that. And we still wonder what that alternative world would have looked like, right? Given everything that I know now. And so I was at a conference in Palm Springs, and I went for dinner to meet one of my wife's colleagues, and as happens, she was in their home with my daughter having dinner with them while I was taking calls sitting outside in the car.
Right.
Yeah, that's all the family things you miss as an entrepreneur, where you're like, what were you doing when this happened? I was on the phone talking to somebody. So I was on the phone with that investor and with Josh, and we kind of like were trying to negotiate the term sheet a little bit, and they did negotiate it a little bit and gave us a little bit of give, and then they told us like, this is at the max, you kind of have to make a decision, right? And that had been in the works too for a couple of 3 months at that point, right? And then Josh and I kind of like had to bite the bullet, and we were like, this is it, right? Either we sell in 2 weeks' time, or we sign this term sheet and take the money and keep growing. And that's, we talked and we realized that, like, and it wasn't even an hour-long conversation, right? It was like a 5-10 minute conversation with Josh, and we were like, can we actually do the term sheet, right? The entire management team is already counting. Remember, we took 14 million of that 117 and distributed it to 100 employees, not including the founders. Right. So we explicitly set out to make everybody other than us rich, and we succeeded. There were like customer service people who walked in to the company thinking after the announcement that was being acquired, who thought they were being fired. And then after a conversation with me, they went out and bought houses in Portland. So it was life-changing money for not just us, but everybody in the company. The VCs were bought off. They were like, look, we're making, we thought, 6 months ago, we were worried that this was going to go to hell in some flaming basket, and now you're giving me a 4 to 6x return. I'm in. Right? So and it was cash. It was a good deal, and we were like, can we walk away from all of that and just take the VC money and keep building? And there was just too much momentum behind the deal already. Right? It was like, it wasn't really even about us. We were like, we pretty much have to fire a good chunk of the people, because they're just going to be like, wait, I was going to make 300K and now I get nothing.
Right.
Right. So it just wasn't realistically possible at that point. Things have momentum, right? And once you get to a certain point in the momentum, it takes a huge amount of effort to stop it even. So that's when we kind of like acknowledge the reality that we probably weren't going to do this VC, and we were probably going to sell. And I guess that's it, Josh. Yeah. It's not like he was in a different place, I was in a different place. It
was a short conversation. Yeah.
It was a short conversation. We were both like, are you in the same place? You're in the same place. Yeah. I mean, let's go sell it then. And that's what
I'm curious, for people who knew you best, and even at a great financial exit, but knew that you weren't done building, how did you start to explain that?
The people to whom it was the hardest was employees, right? And there were the senior folk who knew about the deal and had actually helped with like due diligence and everything, because Josh and I could only do so much by ourselves, right? And so for them, it wasn't hard to explain, because they knew the trajectory of the funding side of the business. They'd worked on the due diligence with Warburg and seen it fall apart, and kind of had. We kept the management team. We took the management team along, right, on this journey, and so they knew what was going on, and they weren't like upset about the sale, because they made a ton of money out of it, right? The hardest thing, I think, was to talk to the sort of the remaining 90 employees, right? And Josh and I split it up, and we spoke to every employee the day of the announcement, which was I think February 16th or something so it was like 3 weeks after, 2-3 weeks after this, right? And then we had to explain to them that like this was kind of the option that made the most sense, and it wasn't really anything else that needed to happen. And we truly believed, which was true, we truly did believe that this was the best option for the company. And having BBVA as both a strong bank partner, because a lot of our problems throughout the history of the company, and now looking back on it, on the entire history of like fintech, was that you needed a bank partner. And bank partners are heavily regulated, and whatever problems they have with regulation that might not have anything to do with you are just going to rebound on you and can easily set your business back 6 months, a year, 2 years, and that's death.
2.5 years to be precise.
Yep. And that's the kiss of death for a startup, right? You measure time lost, and you lost a week on this, you lost a month on that. Just saying that, like, you lost 2 years because Hire One got into trouble with the regulator, and that now means that Bancorp is swamped. And I'm like, what's that got to do with me? My business is doing great. I have no problems with any regulator. Damn it, doesn't help, right? So that kind of thing. So we truly believe that having a strong bank partner who was both funding the company and providing the balance sheet and the compliance coverage would allow us to dramatically grow faster. And we were never in it to become billionaires. Josh and I from the start were always like, we do want to make money for employees and investors and everybody, but we really want to fix the world of banking, right? And we were like, we can fix it much better this way. Maybe naive in hindsight, right? But that's what we believed at that point. So I think employees kind of understood that and trusted us that if Josh and Shamir think the right thing is to sell the business to BBVA, then that must be the right thing to do. Oh, and I'm making 50K. Oh, heck yeah, I'm in.
bonus.
Right.
Well, and I think that's a good way of putting it, right? Because like there's an element of like practicality and like financial outcomes for everyone involved, but there's also like the 100 of you, and I remember this very clearly. I was a simple customer back in the day, and one thing that always came through very clearly in everything you guys did was you were very mission driven. Like you wanted to fix banking. I'm trying to remember the original text that was on the like website when you were just getting signups, and it was like, we're going to build a better bank, or it was some like really simple statement that was like really resonated with like thousands and thousands of people, including me. And like I think the carrying the mission forward to the acquirer, that's a really interesting thing, because I know some fintech founders that exit, they like know from day one, like this is going to die as soon as it goes into this company, but like we're doing this for other reasons. With you guys, you carried that mission forward and genuinely thought you were going to be able to kind of continue to build on that. Walk us through like what happened next. Like what were those next? I can't remember how long you stayed at BBVA after the acquisition, but what was that experience like?
So one of the main premises of the acquisition was that we could use BBVA's backend platform. Remember, this was long before anything called a BaaS existed. The word BaaS didn't exist. Actually, at this point, I think somewhere in 2014 is when I first heard the term neobank, right? And I didn't like it back then. I've gotten used to it now. But I'm like, so we kind of had built our own platform on top of a company called TXVia mainly, and also like using some of Bancorp's technology. But it was a cobbled together mess that barely functioned at the best of times. And TXVia had been acquired by Google, so they exited the industry. So that was a massive source of a lot of our problems, right? And so then we switched to First Data, but in the middle of that switch got acquired by BBVA. So we switched from TXVia to First Data, and as soon as that was done, we then switched from First Data to BBVA. And so that's why we, for like a period of like 3 years in there, 60 to 90% of the energy of the engineering team was just on backend, like nothing that any customer ever saw. And the product frankly stagnated, right? With some improvements and here and there tweaks and stuff. And it was still revolutionary and different enough that it just still carried us through that period from like basically 14 to 17. But it also meant that was the period of time in which like Chime caught up with the company, right? Chime launched and grew, right? And so that a lot of the senior management team just basically left after the acquisition, and including me. I can't complain about that when I did it myself. And I actually left Simple and moved to BBVA, which was totally not an earnout related thing. It wasn't like my earnout was very much tied to Simple's outcome, regardless of whether I worked there or not, right? And so I went to BBVA and I helped them build the platform that Simple transitioned to, because the idea that Simple would transition to BBVA was great, but BBVA didn't actually have anything called an API platform or a tech platform. So it was like, how does this actually work? Well, you need to show us APIs. And it's like, we don't have any APIs. We're going to have to build some. And then somebody came up with the idea, well, if you're building APIs, why not do it right and sell it to everybody, not just Simple? And I was like, that's a great idea. I became an advisor to that. Then I took over that business and ran it. So we built and launched the open platform at BBVA in the US. And we also launched another API platform in Europe which was a PSD2 style platform in Europe. So that was the first PSD2 style platform in Europe. And the open platform at BBVA was the first BaaS platform from a bank anywhere in the US, probably anywhere on the planet. So I can say and this is between me and Jason, that I launched the first neobank. we can first or second. Let's be honest there, right? And I can say that I launched the first PSD2 style platform anywhere on the planet, and probably the first BaaS platform from a bank anywhere on the planet. And that was before I turned 35. Oh no, before I turned 37. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm much older than that now, and I've given up trying to keep track of these things. So we launched the open platform, simple transition to it. It worked. It was actually one of the smoothest transitions. We launched other businesses on it. We even got other customers like Google to sign up to use the open platform at BBVA. But the problem was that, and this is one of the things I just now realized, right? Like the hardest thing in the venture world, my opinion, is to go from 0 to 10 million in revenue.
Yeah.
Right. It is very hard to get to that 10 million number. And if you get to 10 million, you'll probably sail to like 20 to 50. Everything has its own challenges. Every time you double, it's the new challenge. But I feel like 0 to 10 is the hardest part, right? But when you get to 10 million, you're like probably a Series B company, maybe depending on, which environment you are. You're like anywhere from like a 50 to a 500 million company. Maybe if it was 21, you're $1 billion company. But 10 million is nothing to a large company. Like you go to BBVA and they're like, I can tweak my loan pricing slightly and increase profit in the US by 10 million this quarter. Profit.
Yeah, they can find it under the sofa cushions, right? Yeah.
So the thing was that to nobody in the company was anything that the innovation team did going to actually move the needle in terms of profits at any point, right? And so the whole focus that BBVA had on innovation from essentially 2000, but really from 2010 to 2020, and trying to kind of take over the world, was very much a top-down labor of love or really belief in the future, which was very much driven by the leadership they had, FG and Carlos, and they truly believe that fintech and technology would change the world of finance, and I agree with them actually. But it meant also that when times were tough, right? As long as times were good, things were good. But when times were tough, are you going to cut the core business that's generating billions of profit, or are you going to cut these hanger-on platforms, which even maybe they're growing great, maybe they're going from 10 to 50 million in revenue, but they're not adding anything to profit. A startup doesn't even think about profitability till it gets to 100 million in revenue, right? So nothing that BBVA is doing on the innovation side was close to that. Even simple in 2018-19 with I think million plus customers, a lot of them active, finally beginning to work again on new product development, and everything was just not anywhere close to being profitable, and not even close to being the sort of profitability where it would have meant anything to BBVA's balance sheet. The pandemic came along, and suddenly BBVA had to find a few tens of billions under the seat cushions. And this, I think, is part of the history of BBVA, is their strategy has always been great and sort of visionary, like a decade ahead of the rest of the industry, even going back to, decade before. But their timing when they acquire companies and when they sell them is abysmal. Somehow they always buy at the top and sell at the bottom. So they sold Compass and Simple in late 2020, in the depth of the pandemic,
Brutal.
Right? When Simple, as an independent company, would have probably had a 5 billion plus valuation in late 21.
Yeah.
Right. And they basically sold it for nothing to PNC. And PNC was PNC has been a very sort of non-forward thinking bank. They're kind of the opposite of BBVA. They just didn't want anything to do with Simple, and basically told BBVA to shut it down before it came over. Right. And so BBVA did, but it was really PNC who drove that. And it's just a disaster, because you're another 18 months and they could probably have sold Simple and the actual the other businesses, which were all number 1, 2, 3 in their industries. They could have probably sold the whole thing for 10 billion. just the innovation businesses, forget the Compass, the traditional bank, which is what they sold for like 14 billion, right? So it's like you acquired Compass in 2007 at the height of the previous boom, invested billions in it, and then sold it at the depth of the bust in 2020. If you had bought it in like late '08, you would have gotten it for a third of the price. And if you had sold it in late 21, you would probably have doubled the price.
There was quite a Twitter, now X, outpouring as people's simple accounts were being closed. What was going through your head that this thing that you and Josh had like poured your lifeblood into, your dreams and passions, as you said, it wasn't about making money. Well, that was important, and you wanted to change lives as investors. You wanted to fix the system. And in some regard, like you failed. They killed it. Right. Granted, you weren't there, but like, how did you feel? How did you begin to reconcile that?
In a weird way, it felt with many different feelings because it took a period of months, right? So, but like at some early on, it felt like, when you get a call from an ex whom you haven't talked to in years, and you realize like how much that used to matter to you but doesn't anymore, because there was all these people, as you said, on Twitter who were all about simple, and I'm like, oh my god, so many people still care, and they still associate me with it, even though it's been like 6 years since I left now, right? And 6 years since I left Simple, 4 or 5 years since I left BBVA. I have a whole new startup which I'm working on and trying to raise money for, and all these people are telling stories about how much they love Simple and also like being pissed off at me, and I'm like, it's been so long, right? So that was that weird feeling of like it's a blast from the past, right?
Yeah.
Then the other part of it was I was still like Simple was still my primary bank up until like I only switched to like a month before they finally shut down all the accounts, right? Actually a few weeks before. So I was like I was basically account number one, and probably the last account off the platform. Josh and I,
you were going to be an active user right until the very, very end.
I was an active user up until the last month of like the last 30-day period. I was still active in that period.
That's amazing.
And I had to then figure out, like, for example, one of the features that we had in Simple, which I don't think anybody else like really ever copied well, and I don't know why, was we allowed people to add photos to their transactions. And in the early days, we were almost competing with Instagram, funnily enough. Like we thought people would attach photos of receipts and keep track, and very accounting minded, me and Josh somehow. But the most of the stuff that people had, we did an analysis once, one of our product guys did it, had nothing to do with receipts. Receipts weren't even 10% of the photos. The biggest category of photos that were added to transactions was food. People took photos of the food and attached it to the receipt for the restaurant, right? I actually used that feature to chronicle the early life of my daughter. So I had photos of like the food at the hospital when she was born attached to the receipt, early photos of her. So I had to go back and download all those photos from Simple and make sure that I had them in my Google Photos, because I wouldn't have them anymore otherwise, right? And she is now 11 years old, and yeah. So the hardest part for me was actually like the actual shutdown and going through and like reorganizing my finances, and then realizing like this is freaking exactly why we started this, because the rest of the shit is so broken, and I didn't truly realize how well we had actually solved it. But for me personally, right now, my financial life is way worse than it was when I was a Simple customer. One is great, but then one also got acquired and is what is it, part of Walmart now or something? So I'm like, damn it, and I'm like, things have gotten better, but they are still so far from solved. So yeah, it for a period of months, it was like, just like, what has this got to do with me? And then being like, oh yeah, no, this has so much to do with me.
That's amazing.
Who knew the pivot you needed was to be an Instagram play before, Instagram was so big? That
I know
was the
you just
future.
missed the boat on that one. Yeah.
I mean, it's still out there, man. I haven't seen anybody combine Instagram and finances really yet. I'm surprised Instagram hasn't tried, and I'm surprised like Chime hasn't tried.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Alex, you go ahead, and then I've got one last question to wrap this up.
Well, I think our question is probably the same, but so exiting out of Simple and BBVA, I guess the question I was curious about was just how did you sort of think about yourself, your identity, your sort of passion for entrepreneurship, having gone through all of that? Because as you said, you are now on to your next startup. It's, from what I gather, going very well, but like you had to sort of start that whole journey all over again, find a new problem or maybe an extension of a problem that you'd encountered in your last startup to kind of pursue full time. What was that sort of emotional journey, sort of jumping back into entrepreneurship?
So I think, I don't know about other founders, but there's this quote that comes to mind, right? Like a reasonable man adapts himself to the world around him. An unreasonable man persists in adapting the world around him to himself. Therefore, all progress is dependent on the unreasonable man. And I have spent, I'd say, 20 plus years of my life, adult life at least, being very unreasonable. I was determined to fix the world's problems, and I never did anything for the money. And by doing so, I have made more than enough money, and I've done very little to actually fix the world's problems. So c'est la vie, right? And I kind of think I had a bit of this hero complex. I don't know, where I was like, I am going to fix this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is going to make the world a better place. This thing is broken and I will fix it. Now I'm in my mid 40s now, and definitely don't have like the energy level of like a 20 something McKinsey consultant, right? And I'm like, I slowly come to terms with the fact that the world is in many ways a shitty place. And even when I die, hopefully, like 40 plus years from now, it will still probably be a shitty place. Right? And if I want to fix the world, forget one lifetime, I'm not even sure 50, 100 lifetimes would be enough, right? There's just so much that's broken, whether it's war, climate change, homelessness, like the financial sector itself has like 100 things that are broken about it.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? I realize now that I'm not going to be able to solve any of it, maybe very, very, very little of it. And I'm much more okay with that now, right? I'm like, I am not, I'm not, pick whomever, right? Alexander the Great or whatever picture who rewrote history. Definitely not that person. And I'm like, I'm much more now like thoughtful about like, hey, the people I interact with along the way, right? Doing things like, just taking care of myself. There was a period of I used to do a lot of martial arts when I was a kind of a teenager, in my early 20s. And then for like period of like almost 20 years, I did none because work, startups, kids, life just caught up with me. Now I'm back. I, do more exercise, do more jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, I'm not going to I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to take care of myself because guess what? Not young anymore, right? If I don't, then nobody else will. And I've also realized that my ability to solve financial and technology problems does not have to be my identity, right? My identity is whatever I choose to be today. And today, maybe Shamir doesn't want to be or doesn't feel like he's going to be the greatest fintech founder of all time. Maybe Shamir today is just going to try and get the better of this 28-year-old ex D1 wrestler on the jiu-jitsu mats. Right? Maybe that's Shamir's identity for today.
That is such a powerful lesson and ties into something Alex and I were talking about in the opening episode. Last question for entrepreneurs that have raised money. Maybe it was a small amount, a large amount, but they're now facing this existential crisis that so much of their identity is wrapped up around this startup, and they're facing the hard decision. And that decision might say, hey, it's a softer landing and has some, silver lining to it, like selling to a major bank and getting a paycheck and, some, game-changing money. It may also mean, like, hey, giving up on the entrepreneurial dream altogether. Either way, it's not what you set out to do. For someone who feels like they're standing at that juncture, at the end of a plank, about to step off to the other side, what advice would you give?
It's okay to fail. It's okay. The world will not end. Your life will not end. Most people's lives will not end because you had to shut down your startup. Many people have done it before. Many people will do it again. We are not in Gaza or Ukraine or wherever else fighting some crazy war, like where literally lives are on the line. Things can be much worse. We live in one of the greatest nations on the planet. We have the privilege of having people who actually give us money just because they think we're smart, and on the hope that the 10% probability that we'll return that money to them someday, right? Not even the 90% probability. It's much less than that. And so the fact that you managed to go on this journey at all is amazing in and of itself, right? Where that journey ends, nobody knows. You got to fight the good fight. So much of it is just luck and timing, right? And you people like to think it's all about ability. Heck no. I think you need to have perseverance. Without perseverance, you cannot succeed. But how much of success is determined by perseverance? Maybe 10%. It's a necessary condition, but not sufficient at all, right? So just like maniacally sticking it out, that is needed for success. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to succeed. You might still fail despite maniacally sticking it out. And at some point, you do have to kind of take care of yourself. So my biggest message to folks is it's okay to fail, and you are not defined by your successes, and you are not defined by your failures, right? It's okay to have a 9-to-5 job and have hobbies on the weekends and spend time with family. Not the end of the world. Unemployment is what, like less than 4%. Any good, decent startup founder, heck, any decent startup person should be able to find a job in 6 months, I would think, no matter what, right? So yeah, it's okay. Find a job, take care of yourself, and maybe take another try in a few years' time. That's totally fine.
Shamir, thank you for the honesty around the journey. And honestly, for as much as you and I have talked both through the process of, building and exiting, I even learned some tidbits about the simple journey that I didn't know. So thank you for taking that.
There are so many more. I feel like I need to write a book, and maybe I finally will one day.
That'll be the next rock that you try to push up the hill.
Exactly.
Well, we can't wait to read that. In the meantime, Jason, as you said, Shamir, thank you so much for the honesty and for taking the time. This was great.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fintech Takes. Stay up to date with emerging companies and the latest fintech trends by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. And if you love Fintech Takes, please tell a friend.